Hi everyone, so nice meeting you all in person. I've already heard today that I'm a little bit like Miss Colombo. Lots of people have heard of me, but nobody was sure I existed. Today we know I do. So I want to take you on a little journey into the field of digital humanities. You may know, or some of you may know, or be aware that there is a certain intersection of the LaTeX community and the digital humanities community, although I think I'm the only representative today. So, yeah. I wanted to, first of all, tell you what the digital humanities are. Usually I have to explain what LaTeX is, but this time it's the other way around. Yeah, and so I want to ask, basically, LaTeX exists in the digital humanities, but it's not used as much as it could be, and I'm wondering why that is. Maybe I'll have some answers. And I'll show 3 use cases of where it is being used in the field. 2 are pretty simple, which is conference proceedings and printed books, but the 3rd case is maybe the most interesting, and that is print versions for digital scholarly editions, and then I'll finish with the challenges and how we can maybe popularize LaTeX in the digital humanities. Yeah, so I said that. So first of all, for all those of you who haven't heard of the digital humanities, it can be kind of hard to imagine what that really is. Also for people in the digital humanities, because it's a difficult question, no one knows, and there are rumors that we don't want to define it. So I gave this pragmatic definition, and that is, digital humanities means using digital methods for humanities data and to answer humanities research questions. And so you have a bit more of an idea of what that can entail. There's also this tripartite distinction of different areas in DH. One was called Humanities of the Digital by Camille Roth, which is kind of like media studies, so thinking about media using humanities theories. In my experience, that's very much present in the Anglophone area and is not really the primary focus of my flavor of DH. I think maybe some in my flavor of DH wouldn't even be so aware of that part. But I think that's what many people believe digital humanities is, basically internet philosophy or something. Something that's in fact very important is the digitized humanities. That means you do humanities things, but in the digital realm. And that doesn't mean just using Microsoft Word. We're hoping they're not doing that, but they are. Basically, it would be doing what humanities people would have done anyway, such as creating editions of historical texts, but they do it in the digital realm. So that would be modeling, annotation, and maybe using bigger corpora and more linked corpora than before. But it's not fundamentally different. And then there's the computational humanities that are very much on the rise right now. That means applying computational methods to humanities data. For example, this would be computer vision, large-scale text analysis, which I think for a computer science person is maybe not that large, and you would refer to it as text mining, but we call it distant reading, although these terms are under much debate. So basically, machine learning for humanities data. It proves surprisingly difficult because humanities data are kind of hard, and usually the algorithms are not made for humanities data. Yeah. So I came up with 3 use cases for LaTeX in the digital humanities where basically LaTeX is already being used or could be used. One of them, obvious one, is conference submissions. It's quite pragmatic, but doesn't really pertain to the research topics themselves. So you could say it's the same for any discipline. Another thing that I once took a personal interest in because I was helping someone was archaeological catalogues. So humanities people for the PhD thesis, for example, often compile catalogues. And especially in archaeology, these have many images. So Microsoft Word doesn't do them so well. And that's why LaTeX would be very good to use, although it's not very common. I once wrote a blog post that basically showed how to use a CSV data to automatically create such a catalog. This is in fact extremely useful, but I still don't think that anybody picked it up despite the ease of use. And what I'm mainly going to talk about today is print versions for digital scholarly editions, and in case you're wondering what that entails, I will also talk about that. So just a quick word on the conference proceedings. So, for example, the Computational Humanities Research Conference, I've already mentioned Computational Humanities, it's this field on the rise that is, it is digital humanities, but kind of leaning towards computer science. And so this has actually been criticized. Some people in the field have been complaining that this conference only allows LaTeX submissions because it's seen as exclusionary. LaTeX is not necessarily something people in the humanities naturally kind of know or learn in their undergraduate degrees like they do in the sciences often. And so there actually is a discourse in the digital humanities. Do you have to be able to code? Is it fair if the digital humanities distinguish themselves by being very technical? And so this is a kind of loaded discourse. So I agree that not all people in the digital humanities need to code, but I don't really see how LaTeX has to take the blame. I've written a little bit about that, and maybe I will in my proceedings contribution as well. I think people are feeling kind of alienated by LaTeX because there is a bit of hard feelings towards the computer science community that is seen as kind of exclusionary for people who come from the humanities. But I don't think that has anything to do with this community that I would assume most digital humanists don't even know or aren't even aware of. I think there are many pros to doing this. First of all, you outsource typesetting work. Maybe to also link back to what Boris has been talking about with the decolonizing and so on. There are many discourses like that in the digital humanities as well. So one question is it actually a good practice to outsource things to the users, for example, especially if corporations do that, then of course they're using the users as workers basically and then making a profit from the data they create. But since in this case it's a small community effort, this makes sense because it just saves money, but places a burden on the editors, of course. I think humanities scholars can easily learn LaTeX. That was what I had been trying to communicate with my blog. You might know about it, the LaTeX Ninja, although I'm a little embarrassed that I don't really blog that much anymore, so I'm trying to revitalize it every once in a while, but I've come to the point where I'm not promising anything. But I do think it's easily accessible to all humanities people if they're using it essentially as a markup language, and I think that's mostly all they need, so not the level of LaTeX use that is present in this room, basically. Yeah, but this also leads to fast open access publication of proceedings, which is, I think, very important for early career scholars to have things out fast. This is another phenomenon that maybe you aren't aware of in the computer science fields or sciences, is that humanities publications take very, very long to get published. Especially if you work in the digital humanities, they might take so long that everything is obsolete. So of course we can't have that, and I think LaTeX is really helpful in letting us publish faster. Then young people can have the publications on their CV. It's out in good time so that it's not obsolete, and I think there are many good things about that. Also, it doesn't rely on exploitative publishing practices, for example, not publishing open access or publishers taking lots of money or making money on articles that people are writing who are not getting paid for that. So that's, I think, basically why LaTeX can be useful politically. I've already mentioned this other topic and the big title of archaeological catalogues, but of course it's more generally about physical books. So I think this is a discourse that maybe hasn't touched you as much as other areas or fields have been touched, but there have been these predictions that print is going to die out. And I think now we can be confident in saying that this is not the case, and it seems unlikely to occur in the near future. And I think this is due to a reason that is very humanities to point out, and that is that books as material objects have value, and books function as cultural capital. I don't know if you are aware of this trend, but for example, there's the book talk community on TikTok, where people are basically, if you say it in very abstract terms, they're gaining cultural capital or status from the books that they read. Or celebrities, for example, have book curators, so they pick out books that celebrities are photographed with. So actually in this time of visual media, it seems that material physical books have regained value in a way that we wouldn't have expected, or people that made these predictions wouldn't have expected. Yeah, so in the humanities also, books endure. In fields like archaeology, as I mentioned, it's still common to compile these extensive catalogues of findings, and they contain lots of images, and I think I don't need to get in so much detail about this for this audience. But if anybody who's watching the video in the future wants to know, they can look at these slides in more detail. You know why LaTeX is great, I guess. So I want to go to my third use case, and that is print versions for digital scholarly editions. So, in my opinion, in this second part of the digital humanities that I mentioned, the digitized humanities, digital scholarly editing is a very important field. There is a big community of this. This has given rise to the digital humanities, basically creating editions of books online and based on XML data. So you could say it's one of the core fields of work in DH, at least it is for me, because in Graz, where I'm located, this has been a dominant focus for a long time, even though we can also feel that people are moving to more computational methods. So my diagnosis is that digital scholarly editing has been and will continue to be a core task in the digital humanities, and thus LaTeX will continue to be relevant and remain relevant for the DH as a field. So digital scholarly editions use TI XML as their standard. So this can allow us to produce print versions. It can also allow us to produce web versions, which is what usually is being done. But basically, we always have the option to produce a print output using LaTeX, even when the primary intent of the publication is not to publish in print. So we can use these TI XML data, transform them via XSLT. Maybe we even employ large language models to generate LaTeX code. This is also a big discussion in the field. Will digital humanists have to be able to code in the future? As I've mentioned, this is generally a question, and of course with the advent of large language models, even more so. And I think this is very relevant, but so far kind of underused as a use case. Because, in fact, many humanists like to print things out. They want to work with paper. Often these texts are so dense that you want to work with them and read them in a printed out format. So it's great to have a web version with all the advantages that come with it, such as no limitation, because of course print is limited. It's expensive, and you have to think about what really has to go on the page, what needs to be omitted. That's what people like about web versions, that they don't have to make this choice. But of course, yeah, print is still useful. So, as you may know, there's this RelatMag package that is wonderful as a tool for this. Yeah, so I'm not sure how familiar people here are. Of course, you're familiar with XML, but the text encoding initiative, is that also well known here? Okay, so I don't need to go into this. Just in general, it supports different types of texts and also critical apparatus. So just as a mini XML primer, in case you don't know, I put a minimal example on the slides. This is TI XML. The root element is called TI. It has a TI header and a text block, and in this text block you can do lots of semantic encoding. And in case you aren't aware of what a critical apparatus is, so it a critical edition or apparatus documents variants of a text in different witnesses of textual transmission. So for example, Cicero text has been transmitted in many different manuscripts, and if you want to make a definite edition, then people would compare all these manuscripts, say what the differences are, and make a scholarly argument about which version is best or probably closest to what Cicero wanted to say, if that's even possible. So these things can be encoded or represented in LaTeX using the RelatMag package. And I just put one example on the slides in case you haven't seen what that looks like. You have the main text and then the critical notes. And so this, of course, as I said, can be done in TI, but it looks different in TI than it does in LaTeX, of course. So in TI, critical apparatus is encoded with app for apparatus, RDG for reading, or RDG group for reading group. And then there's also lem that allows us to put in text that is not contained within any witness, but that I want to put in the final version, basically. And there are two code examples of what that can look like. Basically, you have different versions of the text, and there are no annotations around the text that is the same in all versions. Then, to make this even harder, there are 5 different ways of representing this in the TI. First of all, because they have different advantages and disadvantages, but also, I guess, yeah, humanities people want to be very precise, and this is necessary, I guess. And these options, just so you've heard of them, they're called location references plus internal or external, double endpoint plus internal and external, and parallel segmentation. So of course, if I want to transform something from any generic TI document to this LaTeX version in RelatMag, I have to consider lots of cases, basically. There is, in fact, a transformation tool already, and this is from the TI apparatus toolbox, TI CAT. And this has the functionality, as basically a web tool, that you upload your TI document that contains apparatus, you set parameters via a web form, and then it will run the TI to LaTeX transformation and give you a PDF. This is great because it's usable if you don't know any XSLT, basically. But of course, it's also limited in terms of what you can customize. And I think if somebody put in all the work of encoding their text, they probably want to make custom changes. Anyway, I mean, humanities people always want to make custom changes, I guess. Yeah, so there is this XSLT template, but it's quite complex. I was once asked to teach this to someone, and then I looked at it myself and realized, wow, this is very, very complicated, even if you knew both the TI and the RelatMag. So what I did for teaching purposes was to create a simplified XSLT document, and which was basically the result of the first and sadly thus far last in-person LaTeX Ninja workshop that I gave in 2022. Maybe that I have to get back into this, but this is for the future directions, maybe. So this was supposed to help learners get used to this XSLT, but it's not that easy, especially for someone who's not into technology as much as maybe people in this room. Yeah, so we get right into the challenges and my attempts at popularizing LaTeX in the DH, as in future attempts. So some of the challenges that I haven't mentioned yet are that humanities scholars or digital humanities scholars seem to have a difficult relationship with print, even though humanities scholars like print. I think this is something to do with how the field originated by differentiating itself from the classic humanities. And I think despite it being very useful and practical and having obvious advantages, LaTeX isn't really used that much in the field. I think that's also why people were actually turning to my blog, even though initially I thought I didn't really know that much about it myself, but there really just weren't that many resources. I think opportunities are, as I mentioned, providing XSLT to LaTeX transformations that can produce print outputs from TI data. especially given that an alternative provided by the XSL language, XSLFO, was discontinued in 2012. So if you want to have a print output from TI, LaTeX transformations are basically the only option. I want to also mention one more example from my own DH work in the past. I've worked on this project. It was called Graph, the Graz Repository of Ancient Fables. And this was kind of a digital scholarly edition of fable texts from antiquity for Greek and Latin classes. So we worked together with students, asked them which vocabulary do you want explained, and came up with a simple edition that would be interactive, but it also crucially had print outputs because, as you might know, teachers often want to print things out and want to do them with their students. And since the web portal actually contains all the solutions, they did not want to hand the solutions to the students, so we needed to print it out. And so I created these worksheets using LaTeX. But what you might have to know about this is that we work with GAMS. This is the Humanities Asset Management System and XML-TI-based platform for archiving digital scholarly editions. So it's a repository, but it is also a platform for making the editions available, basically. And it generates all representation from this data on the fly. That means the only thing that gets archived is the XML-TI data and maybe some metadata, but everything else, the web page, even RDF, is generated on the fly, and also this would be the case for PDFs if people are using it. So there I encountered lots of issues, which was that the only thing that you were able to get out of this was basically finished PDFs, or if there were errors, nothing, and very cryptic error messages. This proved very cryptic and time-consuming to fix, and sometimes errors occurred even in documents that were previously tested outside of this environment, and it really didn't provide lots of opportunities to look into what was happening. So you had to run it locally. That was kind of contrary to the system's intended automation. Then also I wasn't able to fix errors locally because it was supposed to generate automatically without mistakes. And that just proved way too time-consuming. And then recently they're developing the next version of this system, GAMS 4. And the previous lead programmer, my former boss, went into retirement, and he was the one, I think, supporting LaTeX. And ever since, I'm the only remaining supporter, basically, in the team. And this new version didn't even carry over the LaTeX features, so I didn't even have the opportunity to access the LaTeX code generated by the XSL transformation. And of course, you can get mistakes from LaTeX not compiling, like LaTeX internal errors, but of course you also have errors from a faulty style sheet. So there are many different sources of errors that are very hard to debug if you can't even see what code you produced. Yeah, so far the team has agreed that I should come up with ways of making LaTeX more palatable or interesting to them, and to use static uploads in the future so that we could use LaTeX transformation, compile everything basically locally, and then upload PDFs and archive them in the system. This is kind of contrary to the system's intention, because of course PDFs are bigger to archive than XML-TI files, but it seemed programming-wise, yeah, the programmers are also kind of stretched too thin anyway, and since apparently only I am interested in this, I can understand that they want a programmatically simple solution. So what are my proposed solutions? I promised the team I would create a tutorial. I don't know if you're aware of the programming historian. So I was thinking about writing a tutorial that says, what is LaTeX? Why should people care about LaTeX? What are some practical use cases, basically what I've been telling you about. And then especially go into this digital scholarly editing use case and provide a step-by-step guide to transforming TI to LaTeX in the hope that with more teaching resources available, this would be more interesting. And for my team, I already said we were probably moving to a static workflow, so no more on-the-fly LaTeX production. Yeah. And I think as a last thing that I'm supposed to be doing, maybe you have some suggestions for this, is to figure out when and how print workflows make sense or are needed, because it does seem that this is not being supported as much as I would like to, or like to see it supported, because people just don't see why they need it. Yeah. So that's it from me. I have a few references for you, but I don't think you need that to read that. We can look at this if you want after this. And yeah, thanks for your attention.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me how people will reject LaTeX as being too complicated, but constantly fight with word processors and accept it as a fact of life. LaTeX will never change the borders in your table if you delete a line. So, questions for Sarah? I'll go with this for this one.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm sorry if I missed this, but my understanding is people in your community, some of them at least find LaTeX intimidating or not as useful as you think they should, but they produce documents in TEI, this XML format. What is the authoring tools that they use? Like how do they create the TEI XML files in the first place?
Partially automatically. So for example, I'm not sure if Pandoc supports that, but there are similar tools. It's called, for example, the TI Garage. That is a conversion tool, so you could use basically a docx file. Then what also could be is that people from the humanities are producing it in Word using formatting macros, and then we use this TI Garage thing to extract that into XML and write a transformation to get it into TI. So there you would need someone like me who does this mapping, or you could just directly write it in TI. I think that's more what we're trying to get to. When I started out, we used to have this Word macro to transformation thing, but they used to create so many awful errors that were so horrible to debug, and it never worked automatically like it should. So we're trying to get them to just encode it manually. They use editors like, for example, Oxygen XML, because often, you know, it's like interpretative work, so it's slow work anyway, so they might as well put the pointy braces themselves, basically. That was the question, right?
Yeah, right. Thank you.
The tools.
Anyone outside of Boris?
I ask a lot of questions mostly because I have a task of relaying YouTube questions. But this question is not from YouTube, this is from me. There is another, okay, first, we all love your community in our LaTeX community, we are very friendly. But there is another community besides us, which obviously is important for you. And this community of people who work on Unicode, on open-time fonts, and so on. And I happen to know that there is a lot of work of making fonts for ancient languages, for even many thousand years ancient, and work for small languages for small number of users and so on. I wonder, do you need some help from us to create packages for you to use with the fonts, to use with things for archaeological work, for historical work, for work with that? So could you formulate what do you want us to do for you to interface with them?
Oh, that's a great question. It takes some work away from me, and that's great. Lots of opportunities for collaboration. So what I always need is the Unicode for alchemical symbols, because I work with alchemy. So in a 2009 project, William Newman made sure that the most important ones got integrated in the Unicode, but I think they're also not always easy to represent in the font. So that's, of course, helpful, but I think that most of them actually can already be represented in LaTeX. It's just a little clunky, from what I know. And then I think medievalists are using font like Unicode, like with a J in front of it.
We recently put this into TechLive, so I just was happy to see so many interesting things you can do with this.
Cool, yeah, thanks. I think people should also comment in YouTube if they need any fonts rendered in LaTeX, and the community will be happy to, it seems. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, I thought you had a question. You have a question?
So we are using TEA XML heavily in one of our local language publishing project. The local language is Malayalam, which is used in a state called Kerala, the southern states of one of the southern states of India. So how we are creating the TEA XML is we get the author's document and we convert into LaTeX. From there, using TechForest, we create the XML. From, as we say, the XSLT is, we use XSLT to create the tech and the print version as well as the HTML version. The HTML version is even the PDF version we create in such a manner, it can be read in mobile devices also. We will create various forms of PDF because the phone width will be one and the iPad width will be different. So to make it comfortable to read in mobile devices, we create different PDFs as well as the HTML. So if at all some help is required in the XSLT part, we are able to do that. Because we have been using XSLT for the last several years because we do a lot of mathematical this help to the Elsevier science.
Thanks so much. That's very helpful, and it's also great to hear that other people are also still using it. Because there's some rumors in the community in the digital humanities that with the large language models being very good with Python, that maybe XSLT is going to become obsolete. I'm not sure. Maybe not.
You really have a question?
I think I saw Python is harder than learning LaTeX, which shocks me as a software engineer because Python was literally one of the most easiest programming languages I've learned in the years. And I did like 6 years to find out that I have to use the package manager of TechLive itself instead of the package manager of Ubuntu. Yeah, so you also had it talked about outsourcing. Well, Python isn't the thing. Well, that's sufficient, right? There are a lot of Python programmers. But for LaTeX, that isn't so well taught in schools, like maybe someone has done his thesis for his PhD. But what I saw in, well, at my bachelor, for example, LaTeX isn't even known only by few teachers. Despite the fact that it's being well documented. But I think you'll have to give it some time for schools to pick up, to educate the people like doing great things with LaTeX. I mean, we're all around from the world and we're not with that many. So, yeah, I don't know how you're gonna gain that knowledge.
Okay, let me first explain what I meant with Python and LaTeX. So I meant using basically LaTeX like most humanities people would use it, kind of as a markup language, but not actually basically programming it. So that's where this analogy comes in. And so what was the second question?
Yeah, so you stated as a question, I think, in your presentation, and I was wondering how are you going to cope with the schools not teaching LaTeX anywhere, as I'm aware of.
Yeah, I guess like schools don't necessarily need to teach it, but if we have good online teaching resources, at least the people who want to can learn it. That's how I would approach it. To give some more tutorials that are maybe understandable if you don't already have lots of knowledge, because I think documentation is great. I'd already argued that, I think, in some point. But I think for someone from the humanities with no previous knowledge, documentation is not understandable because they lack some basic tech, I would call it like the tech privilege or being aware of how the tech world operates. So that's also something that I feel can maybe bridge a gap, the kind of language barrier in terms of we don't talk about the same things or there's some basic blocks of knowledge missing. Thanks for so many questions also.
Maybe one last one as a comment. I guess you are aware of learnlatex.org. I was just wondering whether it makes sense to think about taking this kind of approach with a twist for, I mean, this is focused on sort of the standard way of thinking about LaTeX, but there might be sort of a path that is more tuned to what you would need in your community. I mean, on the whole, that is already a good starting point, because within a couple of hours you can get anywhere and you get it live. So if there would be something like that, sort of in parallel, maybe, or as a side theme, just a thought.
Yeah, thanks, that's great. I will try to take all that into account and make sure I publish this in many different sources, like the Learn LaTeX and the Programming Historian and Tugboat. I will be very busy this summer. Thanks so much for all these comments. It's really great.
Thank you. Break until 4.